Hi everyone, this is Keri, and today I'm going to be video on tips for doing field work when you're conducting qualitative research or mixed methods research. So here I am, and I wish like ever I could show you. I'm looking out at the Bering Sea. I'm doing work in August of 2025 on our project in Nome, Alaska, and also Bethel, Alaska. But I'm in Nome right now. And so I thought I'd show you some of the things that I do when I get to a brand new community that I don't know anything about, and how I prep for field work, and then also some of the tips for what I do when I'm in the field. First of all, the instant I arrive at the airport, I look around for any information on the community. So, for example, in Nome, I found this right here, okay? And I was able to learn about all the different things going on in Nome. Sometimes they're just very touristy. However, I was amazed that, it talked about the UPIC and the NUPAC and the different Native Alaskan partner agencies. So I was able to kind of get an orientation to what's going on in the community. What are the organizations that are a part of it? Now, I do this, but then I also turn around and I ask in my interview opinions about partner agencies, about the community. This is just for me to be more informed. I don't then use that to skip asking those questions because local knowledge is sometimes very different from what I've read or even what I've heard talking to other people. In this particular situation, I really did feel like I needed to get a little background information because the governing structures were so complex. So I had two preparatory interviews where I was able to ask questions about the culture, about the people, about the structures and the system. And I even did a pilot interview before I went into the field. Then what I did is I iterated as I was talking with various people on my interview guide. And by about interview 3, I know my interview guide really well enough that I don't even need to look at it. I can maintain eye contact when I'm in person in person conducting the interviews. And my approach to conducting semi-structured interviews is to really think about the position of the person. I had typically have looked them up online, gotten as much background information as I can about them, so that once again, I can kind of tailor those questions to that person. Um, if it's just an average person and I'm capturing people on the street or at an event or something, I don't know anything about them. Obviously, you can't do the background information. But when you're doing organizational related work, you really want to go in armed with that information. Now, that doesn't mean you don't still ask them to tell you what their job is and what they do. You still want their perspective. It just allows you to guide the conversation and plan ahead of time. A few things that I do to get ready for my interviews. First of all, in addition to doing that background information, I look over my interview guide and I kind of restructure it based on how I think the interview might go. When I go to the site, I try to get there a little bit early. I poke around. I see if there are things on the bulletin board, if there are flyers about services in the area, any local knowledge that I can gather at that time. I either take a physical copy, like my guide to Nome, or I take photos of various things. So, for example, one of the photos I captured on this trip was tips on what to do if you see a bear. I thought that might be applicable. And of all the interesting things, we actually did see a grizzly bear way off, but during this trip. So, really kind of get the lay of the land. Look at the layout. You can tell a lot about the kind of wealth level of a community based on the quality of the buildings that their organizations are in. I was in one organization this past week where you walked in and literally the toilet paper is piled up that high in the greeting area room. You know, I walked into one agency and they had a lot of the meal preps all sitting out for emergency response. Look at the way things are laid out. Look at the person's office. Look at the pictures they have on the wall. What you're doing is you're gathering cues and clues for how you can make a connection with that person early in the interview. Because your goal, especially if you're asking someone for their time, is to try to make sure that you're making that connection. Now, I also want to share with you some of the differences if you're used to working off of a structured interview where you ask exactly the same questions in an order to everyone. Semi-structured interviews are going to feel very loose to you because they are. You are going with the flow of the interview. There are times that I have asked an opening question, which, by the way, a lot of times I will figure out how to frame the goal of what the interview will be all about. And I tell them that right at the beginning of the interview, because in their mind, they don't want to waste anybody's time. It's really helpful for them to know what they can provide you that will be useful for your project. And so they, quite often, I'll ask that first opening question of tell me about, once I get beyond, tell me about your background. And they may go 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and they may answer the questions, three-fourths of the questions on my interview guide in that very first question. That's fine with this type of interviewing. Nothing's better for them than to get them telling stories and to listen to those stories. And I'll tell you, as an interviewer, sometimes it's really hard because you're sitting there going, oh, I know I only have an hour. I've got to manage time. By the way, I don't keep my cell phone out to manage time. I wear a good old-fashioned watch because I can very subtly look at my watch. And if my cell phone's with me, I turn it over next to me to make sure that I'm not looking at it. Because you want your attention on that other person 100%. As you're guiding this interview and managing the time, you're thinking through, is this headed in the right direction? And there are times that you'll let an entire story go through and I'll be wondering, oh, I'm not sure the dots are going to be connected here. And then at the very end of the story, they connect everything. And it is magical to watch it happen. Like, I think my whole body gets excited if people are watching the interview. They probably are going to see I'm going, yes, 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 this is exactly what I want. If people show you an artifact that, you know, really kind of captures a concept, ask them if you can take a picture. That's a great time to grab your phone and take a picture. But always ask for them to let you take pictures if you're not in a public space, because you never know what's confidential and what isn't. And even though we're always keeping our data very confidential for IRB purposes, we do also want to really respect their space. Another little tip I'll give you is if you have, I often walk in with papers because I take handwritten notes during the interviews. And if there's nowhere for me to set my stuff down and I need to put it on their desk, I always ask permission. May I set my things right down here on your desk? It's a little thing, but people don't like their space invaded. If you ask permission, it's just a polite way for you to make the space comfortable. I almost always will accept coffee or water or something if they offer it to me, if it looks convenient. It's just a matter of connecting once again and getting them comfortable. And I chit chat. I'm looking for those ways to find a connection with that person, because the more comfortable I can get them talking with me, the more data that I can collect from them. I'm amazed. I've finished interviews and had people hug me. I've finished interviews and had people say, wow, this felt like therapy. Thank you for listening to me. It can be a very rewarding experience. But in the moment, doing these interviews, I would say, is some of the hardest listening and decision making that you will ever do in your career, because you're adjusting on the fly and you get better over time and you start to develop a sense for how the flow of the conversation should go. So let's talk about what happens when the interview ends. The instant that I leave, I try to block a minimum of 30 minutes after. I jump on either an audio recording or a Zoom recording, and I do my own debrief. In that debrief, I'm saying things like, here were the top things that I heard in that interview. I take sketchy, high-level notes in the interview so that I can maintain eye contact. And I'm going through and I'm reminding myself of the things that got me interested and excited. And the other thing I'm doing in my debrief is I'm linking to literature. So I might say something like, be sure and see if this comment reflects what the literature on volunteer management says. I'm reminding myself of the literature connections and the theory connections. That is what's great about a grounded theory approach. You are actually analyzing your data as you're collecting it before. You do not wait till you get everything and then sit down and analyze all together. You analyze iteratively as you go through. Very powerful strategy, saves you a lot of time. It also allows you to talk to others and make sense of the comments that different people say. The other thing that I'm doing after I've done several interviews is I start to write my own hypotheses. These are the things that I'm seeing. These are the other people that I would like to interview in this space to try to triangulate the concepts that are unfolding during my interview time period. Making that time to do your debrief and take your own field notes is crucial. If you wait till you've collected all your data, I promise you, you will have forgotten almost all of the details. You never know at the time that you're doing the first few interviews what is going to be a nugget of fantastic data. But as you go through, you start to get a sense, oh my gosh, that's great. That's exactly what I want. And by the way, I will often tell people in the interview, this is exactly the kind of information I'm looking for. Thank you for sharing that story. That will really help us. Giving them that positive reinforcement also, they want to be helpful or they wouldn't have agreed to the interview. So make sure that you're, telling them the kind of things that you want to see in the interview and guiding that interview. Then finally, I would say, reflect, talk to others, mention high level things, very confidential. Do not tell details about any of your interviews to anyone who's not on the IRB protocol. But you might say, I'm seeing this in the interview. I'm hearing this. What's your opinion? There are times when I'm immersed in the field, like I am on this trip, where I then want to go see a physical location to see what that looks like. On this trip, I was fascinated by the idea that there were no roads going in and out of Bethel, Alaska, and everything came in through boat pretty much, or plane. Those are the two main forms of transport. And so I needed to see that kind of experience because it's something different from my own. In Nome, Alaska, they have 3 roads that go out of Nome. And so I wanted to see what those roads look like. I wanted to look at maps. I wanted to understand the interconnections. You want to immerse yourself when you're in the field. Spend every minute you can getting to understand the communities you're working in, read about the communities, think, talk, go to the coffee shop, sit down and strike up a conversation with the person next to you. No, that's not an official interview, but you know what? It's background information. Quite often after that coffee shop conversation, I then go and record my own debrief. It's field notes. It's understanding the community. It's the power of immersion. I'll end by saying that this type of interviewing has become one of the most important things that I do in my life. I feel like I can make a difference in other people's lives. I always go back and do member checks. What I mean by that is I double check that the conclusions that I'm coming to gel with what the community sees. And if it doesn't gel, I dig a little bit more to figure out, are they just unaware? Or is it truly something that I didn't understand when I was interpreting and making sense of the data? I hope you also find this very rewarding. It's going to be different if you come from a quantitative background. I came from a quantitative background. And at first, I felt like, God, how are these people doing this? I've even had people look at me and say, are you doing some kind of magic? No, it is not. It is a rigorous analysis process, but you are sense making when you're in the field. You're getting yourself ready to go to the field, and then you sense make and iterate after you've collected your individual pieces of data and your data as a whole. Thanks so much. I hope you found this brief video helpful.